Please court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. With the defendant, there's always just one more lie. Just one more lie. And that's, ladies and gentlemen, really what this case is about.
Judge,
is the defendant telling...
Overruled. Please be seated. You can continue. Your objection is preserved.
This case is about whether the defendant is telling the truth, whether her story is the truth or not. Because if the defendant's story is not true, the defendant is guilty. Guilty, first-degree intentional homicide of Alex Woodworth on March 22nd. I'd like to start closing argument with a discussion of what's not at issue in a case. And ladies and gentlemen, there's no question in this case, there's no doubt at all, that the defendant caused Alex's death. The defendant killed Alex Woodworth on March 22nd, 2018, when she repeatedly stabbed him. And there's no real question that that action was intentional, ladies and gentlemen, that she intended to cause Alex Woodworth's death. Now you may say, wait a minute, she testified, she said, I didn't intend to, I didn't want to kill him, I didn't plan to kill him, I didn't intend to kill him. But that's not the issue. Because as the judge told you just a little while ago, intent is not just what the person in their mind plans. That's one part of intent. All right, that's one way you can prove intent. If they say, yes, I wanted to kill that person, that proves intent. But intent is also proved if we can show, and if the evidence shows, that a reasonable person at that point in time knows that their actions are practically certain to cause the death of the individual.
Not the law. Objection. That is not the law. Page 5 says the law. That's not the law. Objection. Can we approach?
Your Honor, the law is if the person knows that it's practically certain to cause death, that is intent.
That's not what he said. Can we approach, Judge? He misstated the law.
Your Honor, this is argument.
All right, this is argument. It's overruled. Your objection is preserved. You make your record after that argument.
And when the defendant stabbed Alex 16 times, she knew her actions were practically certain to cause Alex Woodworth's death. And when she left Alex Woodworth there, taking his phone, so that he has no way of getting help, she knew her actions were practically certain to cause Alex Woodworth's death. It's not about whether the defendant killed Alex Woodworth, and it's not about whether the defendant intended to. It's whether you believe the defendant's story most recent story that she was acting, she was afraid. That's what this case is about. If you don't believe that story, then the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant intentionally killed Alex and that she did not act in self-defense. And she is guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. In assessing and deciding whether or not her story is true, you've got to look at her evolving story. Because her story evolves as time goes on. What's her first story? What's her first story about what happened? It's what she tells Officer Reeves, the medical staff at Mayo. This happened at Owen Park in Oak Cliff. I don't know how I got to Menominee. I don't know how I got to Dunn County. This happened at Owen Park. And that's important, ladies and gentlemen. It's important for a variety of reasons. But not the least of those reasons is it's important because when you use your common sense, you know why she's lying about it happening at Owen Park. And you know why someone who's being questioned by police and others about what happened would lie about what happened. Your common sense tells you that. And the judge just instructed you. It's one of, I think, it's a very short instruction, but it's one of the most important ones. And that's instruction number 195 that says, essentially, when you're deliberating, you can consider your experiences in the ordinary affairs of life. And what that, ladies and gentlemen, really is, it's the instruction that says, you walk through this door over here, you go back to the jury room, ladies and gentlemen, you don't check your common sense at that door. You use your common sense. And what does your common sense tell you about why someone's going to lie to a law enforcement officer? Your common sense tells you it's to avoid getting charged with a crime. It's to avoid getting in trouble. Why is the defendant lying and saying it happened at Owen Park? She doesn't want them to go back to the scene. She doesn't want law enforcement to go back by Don Sippel's house and find that muddy road where Alex Woodworth lies dead. She doesn't want them to go back there because she needs to be able to get back there and clean it up. Get rid of Alex's body before law enforcement finds it. That's why she's lying about it. That's why she's misdirecting them over to Owen Park. And ladies and gentlemen, I know you just heard a couple days ago from Dr. Hopper, and he talked about matters that are encoded and problems when stress events. But it's important when we're thinking about this and thinking about this lie here, that we think about where that lie and what events that lie is about. Remember all that stuff? He showed you that chart, and it's got the line where the stress starts. And that's where memory starts to work a little bit different. It's when that stress starts. And before that, memory just encodes like it normally would, and your memories are going to be like they normally are. And that stress event, assuming that that stress event even happened, or assuming that that stress event, the stress event could be, as Dr. Hopper said, being involved in a murder, that stress has not happened yet when she's pulling into that muddy driveway. So there isn't any issue with her memory at that point in time, and yet she's saying it happened at Owen Park, to direct them away so she can go back later and clean it up. Her story evolves from there to, I don't remember anything. I don't remember anything. Even on March 23rd and March 24th, when she's interviewed by Detective Prock, when from her own story that she told you on the stand, her memory had come back, she's still saying, I don't remember anything. She doesn't want Detective Prock or any other law enforcement officer to go back to that scene. She wants them to stay focused on Owen Park. And finally, when she's confronted with the facts, when she's confronted with information, Detective Prock was talking to her in a calm voice, talking to her in a friendly manner. He confronts her and says, look, we found your car. We walked down that muddy road and found your car. What do you think we found? And now she's got to go to Plan B. Plan A is Alex attacked her, he took off with my car, don't know where anything is, don't know where he's at, don't know anything about it. She's got to go to Plan B and say he was attacking her there, and then she stabbed him. And now, all of a sudden, all those facts that, again, using Dr. Hopper's description, are the facts that are super encoded, the critical, the central details of what happened come out. But the story has to evolve even more, and it evolves into the story she told here, because the story she told then is not the same story she told. We need to take a look at and consider what the defendant does when she leaves Alex's apartment. Remember, testimony from everybody is that they were going to leave Alex's and they were going to go to someplace public. They were going to go to someplace where they could talk, be around other people, so there wouldn't be any issues. Well, what do we know about what the defendant actually did as she drove away? We know, ladies and gentlemen, that she's right here, Alex's apartment. She knows, and there's Half Moon Park right here. There's Phoenix Park right here, a couple blocks away. There's Owen Park that she talked about right here, real close to Racy's, where she wants to be. Does she go to any of those public places? Does she go anywhere near them? No. She takes and drives straight out of town, from Cameron to Madison. It all just changes names and drives straight out of town, away from the public, away from a location where she can be with other people as she talks to Alex. Because her purpose is not to talk to Alex, her purpose is to confront Alex. And we're going to talk about that in a while when we talk about the defendant's motive. Her purpose is to confront and get Alex to change his mind about the relationship and admit, as she put it, that the relationship was a mistake. She needs to confront him, and she needs to confront him someplace away from people. What about, and you may have forgotten about, Dan Davidson, who testified fairly early in the trial, but what does he tell you about what he sees? What he sees is important for two reasons. It's important because it contradicts the defendant's story, and it also helps to fill in the timeline of what happens. Because Dan Davidson, bus driver at the time for Rottweilier, person trained to make observations of other drivers so that he can make sure what they're doing, to watch them, to look at their eyes. Tells you he sees a car stopped in the road, pointed at this road. On Louis Bjork's property. And he sees two people in there, and he sees a woman driving. Defendant confirms, yeah, I remember somebody driving around me, so the defendant confirms that in fact this happens. And Dan Davidson tells you clearly it's a woman, not Alex, but the defendant, obviously driving that car. Now, I know defense is going to say something like, well, how does he know? And, you know, he doesn't write that clearly in his statement and so forth. But what reason does Dan have to come here and lie to you? That's what he remembers. He doesn't. He has no interest in this case. In fact, he only became involved because he saw law enforcement searching along the ditches there, and he just decided to stop and, hey, there was this kind of weird thing that happened a couple days ago. Just thought I'd tell you about it. Doesn't have an interest in it. Clearly, the defendant was driving. But what else is interesting about that, and what else is strange about that, is remember the defendant's story on the stand. Well, I thought this would be a nice place to go to talk. A nice place to go to talk? Certainly not a public place. Certainly not a place that looks like a good place to talk where other people are going to know. It's private property. It's a deserted area. It's a middle of a farm field. Is that the place you go to discuss continuing to be friends with Alex? Talk more about your relationship with Alex? Place to talk about what's happening at Racy's? Or is it a place to go and confront Alex? A place where nobody else is going to see what's happening. That's, ladies and gentlemen, what this looks like. A lot more than a place to talk about your relationship. So what happens after they start pulling into there? The car gets stuck the first time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, realistically, and again, this is before, as Dr. Hopper tells you, that the amygdala kicks in and you start reacting based upon instinct, habit, those types of things. This is when you still have rational thought. And the defendant still has her rational thought about her. And what does she decide to do? The rational thought is you're on this muddy road and you're starting to get stuck. If you get stuck, rational thought says, I'm going to back out of here and get out of here before I get stuck so that I can't get out. That's what your rational thought tells you if you're just trying to find a convenient place to stop and talk. Despite the fact that there were probably hundreds of places to conveniently stop and talk where there are other people around. But if you want to get to the location where you, over that hill that you heard about, to where you can't be seen from the road, so you can confront someone and confront them and make them do what you want. You want to keep going. You want to move forward. You want to go over that hill and get away from where everybody else is. And that's what the defendant chooses to do. And once they get stuck, the rational thought is, let's get some help. You know, it's going to have to get out of there sometime, and you're going to have a tow truck someday or sometime. Just because it's going to cost some money, rational thought is we need to get out of here unless we still need to confront him. And he'd do that before anything else happens. Now, as I said at the start, this case turns on whether you believe the defendant's story or not. And I want to talk about why the defendant's story is not believable, why the defendant is not credible. There's 5 areas that I want to cover when I talk about that. I want to talk about the lies that she's admitted that she made. Things that she told you or told others were clearly lies. And not, as Dr. Benson talked about, lies of omission, but rather lies of commission, lies where she intentionally deceived someone, knowing what she said was false. I want to talk about lies that are proved from the evidence. In other words, lies that, based on other testimony, other evidence, were clearly things that she said that are lies. I want to talk about inconsistencies in her story. And I'm going to talk about inconsistencies not in these peripheral details about things that happened after a stress event, but rather inconsistencies either before that stress started. In other words, changes she made to her story before the stress event happened, or inconsistencies in central facts, as Dr. Hopper talked about them. Fourth, I want to talk about how the physical evidence, the things that don't matter based on person's memory, don't matter based upon how people think about things, don't matter on whether you believe someone or not, but physical facts, evidence from the scene, evidence that we've uncovered, and how that physical evidence contradicts the defendant's story and says the defendant's story is not true. And finally, I want to talk about the DNA evidence and how the DNA evidence also, which is another form of physical evidence, another form of physical facts, how that evidence also contradicts the defendant's story. So what lies do we know that the defendant told? We know she lied about how Boy got scratched into her arm, right here. This large area of her arm, how that happened. We know she lied about who did that. And we know she intentionally lied about it. We know she intentionally lied about it because she admitted she intentionally lied about it on March 24th. Because on March 24th, when the defendant was interviewed by Ryan Prock, she told him, first in that interview, that Alex did that, and later admitted, again, when confronted by the truth, when confronted by facts that dispute her story, she changed her story and admitted, yes, I lied, I'm the one that did that. Why lie? Why misdirect law enforcement and try and point them over in this direction when you know they should be in this direction? You lie because you're covering up. You're covering up for what you did wrong. She lied about going to Owen Park. She knew, she admitted on the witness stand that she knew she didn't go to Owen Park when she said that. But she lied about it. Misdirected law enforcement. She lied about going to Racy's first because, and the reason why that's important, it may seem like a small detail, but the reason why it's important is she doesn't want law enforcement to know how important it is to her that she talked to Alex that day. That was the reason why she went against her father's wishes and drove to Eau Claire. That's why she went and found the keys that her father had hidden so she could drive to Eau Claire that day. That's why she went to Eau Claire that day despite not telling Jason the night before in their Instagram messages that she was going to Eau Claire that day. Because she needed to confront Alex. I'm going to talk more about that in a little while. But she didn't want law enforcement to know how important that was, so she said, I went to Racy's first. And changes that story when she's confronted with the facts, when she sees this evidence that shows she's there first. She's at Alex's first. And then her story changes. And she lied when she told Ryan Prock multiple times on March 23rd and March 24th that she can't remember until she's finally confronted with what law enforcement knows. And at that point in time, admits. All right, you got me. But this is what happened. I also want to spend a minute talking about her evolving story or her changing story on where she was when she scratched the boy into her arm. Because in the course of just a few minutes of her interview on March 24th, her story changes on that. And her story changes because initially she tells Ryan Prock that she's sitting in the car when she does that. And just a few minutes later, 2 pages later in the transcript of that interview, she says, oh, I did it on the road because I did it right after I fell down and the phone broke. So I was on the road when I scratched the boy in my arm. And her story changed yet again, moved again, when she got up on the stand. And her story then became, I did it when I was by the back of the car. That's another example of her story having to evolve and change. Because by then she knew about the DNA evidence. She knew what Kevin Scott had found with DNA. And she knew that Kevin Scott had found her blood, her DNA, on the trunk of the car. So now her story has to evolve and change to show why her blood is going to be on the trunk of the car. So now it changes to I scratch a boy in my arm when I'm by the trunk. It changes, it evolves. She can't keep her story straight. Every time she's caught in a lie, her story changes. Number one part, caught in a lie, she's not there. Oh, I can't remember. Caught in a lie that we found your car, her story changes. Caught in a lie, story isn't that great as far as self-defense when all Alex is doing is, making some really superficial scratches on her and wanting to look at her. So her story changes. He was trying to sexually assault me. As she's confronted with facts, she's confronted with the truth, her story evolves and her story changes. That's not someone who's telling the truth. That's someone who's trying just one more lie. Just one more lie to get out of being forced to take responsibility for the murder, the cold-blooded killing of Alex Woodworth on March 22nd. We also have lies that are shown by the evidence in this case, ladies and gentlemen. She told you, and her story is that this knife, right here, this EMT knife that was used to murder Alex Woodworth, that this knife was given to her by Joshane Carlin, her father. That's her story. Joshane, when he's talked to by law enforcement, including Investigator Kowalczyk, says, I didn't give her a knife. And specifically this EMT knife, he says, I bought 2 of these. I just bought 2 of these from Amazon. And he finds this one, the exact match to that knife. Finds this one in his living room where it was supposed to be and says, yeah, the other one should be in my junk basket in the kitchen or out in the truck. And he goes to look for those. He goes to look for it in those locations and he can't find it. He can't find it because this knife right here is lying in the ditch just before Sippel's daughter's driveway. The defendant put it. And if he had actually given this knife to the defendant, why is he looking for it? Because he didn't. She just had taken it. She took it to use it to confront Alex if she had to. And she lied about Max Martinson and the painting that she was giving Max. Remember, she told Detective Prock she gave Max a painting that she had painted for him. That may seem like a minor thing, it's not a big deal. But again, it's part of her attempt to make it look like it's not a big deal that I needed to confront Alex. This is really more what I'm doing. I painted this for Max, and so I needed to take it to her. What we actually know about that painting, though, is that's a painting that's also acting as part of the barrier in her relationship with Jason Mengel, because it's the painting that was hanging above the bed, Jason Mengel's bed, where she had sex with John Hansen. And it's part of the barrier in that relationship that she wants so much, that ancient love that she describes. And so she has to deflect attention away from how important the painting is, and she has to deflect attention away from how important it is for her to meet Alex that day. There's more lies from the evidence. Another one, minor one again, but another one that shows the defendant can't keep her story straight because she doesn't tell the truth. Is she said, I was talking to Jason, I was sitting in my car and talking to Jason when the police arrived. Well, you all saw the video from Officer O'Neill. You all saw that video, and on that video, Officer O'Neill meets with Jason over at the school, over at that Montessori school across the road when he first gets there. And that he then pulls over to Alex's apartment. The defendant's not talking to Jason Mengel when Officer O'Neill pulls up because Jason Mengel is across the street. Her story also changes depending on who her audience is.
I apologize. Could you take that down? I can't see the slides. Is that needed still?
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Her story changes depending on who her audience is. Her story changes, her version of the events changes depending on who her audience is. When she talks about moving out of Jason's apartment, when she talks to Jason, she talks to some other people, it's because of the situation with John Hansen. She just can't take that. She can't be there because of that. But you saw that text exchange between Jenna Van de Zandt and the defendant. She tells Jenna, I'm moving out because of Jason, because I can't take it with him anymore. She tells Jason in that Instagram messaging, I'm going to see Alex and I'm going to tell him off one more time. You know, if he doesn't, if he gives me that look again, I'm going to punch him. I'm afraid I'm going to punch him. That's why she's seeing Alex, according to her communications with Jason. But her story now is, oh wait, no, I was going to see Jason to fix our relationship, to make us still friends. and to talk to him about what's happening at Racy's. Her story changes depending on who her audience is. And her story changes about the heating pad. She tells Jason, I want to return that because it makes me sad. But her statement to Detective Prock is, I returned it because I didn't need it anymore. On March 23rd, she repeatedly lies to Detective Prock when she says she has no idea where Alex's phone is. She repeatedly lies to him over a number of things. Again, where Alex's phone is a central detail that was clearly encoded because it's something she remembers with great detail now. And again, we can't know what the central details are, but we can pretty much infer them by the things that she can describe with vivid detail. And she describes with vivid detail taking the phone, walking with the phone, falling down, the phone breaking. This is her story now. So clearly that's something she remembers, something that's a central detail. But yet on March 23rd, she tells Detective Prock, I don't know where his phone is. She doesn't want to send them back to that scene. She does not want them to be back where Alex's body is until she can clean up and be able to follow through on her plan A, which is Alex attacked me at Owen Park. He must have dumped me in that area, and who knows where he is with my car now. She lies when she says she doesn't know where Alex is. She clearly knows where Alex is. She absolutely does. That is a central detail without any question. She knows where he is, and yet she lies because, again, she doesn't want to send law enforcement back there. She wants to keep to plan A. And finally, she lies, a small detail, but she lies when she says she urinated herself. She wants to make herself look like she was really panicked. So panicked she urinated herself. Yet Joe Wayne and Jennifer Morris, who examined the defendant closely, said she had not urinated herself. She wants to make it look that so bad that she had to urinate herself. It didn't happen. So let's take a look now. Let's consider the physical facts in this case. Let's consider what those physical facts tell us, and let's take a look and see if those physical facts support or discredit the defendant's story. Do those physical facts tell us that she's telling the truth, or do those physical facts tell her that it's just one more lie? Let's start with Alex's cell phone. Alex's cell phone is found there, and her story is that she fell while she was walking, and the phone broke, and that's where it's going to be. Well, physical facts tell us that the front of the phone and the battery, which is out of it, are down here. Right here. Much nearer the driveway. And the physical facts tell us the back of the phone is right here, almost to the location of the driveway. Physical facts show she's not telling the truth about what happened to the phone. It didn't break when she fell down. She took it apart, left part there, and left part in a separate location. A defense may say, well, wait a minute. We know there was water flowing there. There's water flowing down, flowing along here. But the water is flowing in this direction here. From Don Sippel's down towards Louis Bjork's property. And what does your common sense tell you again about this? If water's going to move part of that phone, is it going to move this part that's heavy and going to sink? Or is it going to move this part that maybe is a little lighter and may float along? It's going to make the back oops, sorry, it's going to make the back move, not the heavier part. Physical facts tell us her story is not true. Physical facts about this injury to Alex right here in the side of his head, on the right side of Alex's head. That physical fact tells us the defendant is lying, and was lying when she got on the witness stand and told her story. And why, ladies and gentlemen? It's important to remember the details. And unfortunately for the defendant, she doesn't remember the details. Or at least she doesn't get her story to fit the details. Because she told you clearly, Alex is facing her. He's within inches of her. And the knife is in her right hand. She's holding this knife here in her right hand. Alex is inches away from her while she holds this knife in her right hand, and she stabs him with enough force to go through the temporal bone of Alex's head. And both Dr. Mills and Dr. Thomas told you that takes a lot of force. And ladies and gentlemen, if Alex is facing her, Alex's right side is here, her right side is here. How does she come around and stab him with enough force to go through his temporal bone? No, ladies and gentlemen, the physical facts tell you that this injury right here happened while Alex is facing away from her. And ladies and gentlemen, that does not support self-defense. That supports an unprovoked attack on Alex Woodworth. That's what the physical facts tell us. Not somebody's memory, not somebody under stress, not somebody that has PTSD, not somebody that has anything else. Those are physical facts. Those are things that can't be changed. And that right there tells you the defendant is lying. Defendant's story is that except for one stab in the left side on Alex, every other stab took place while she's in the car. That's her story. That includes the stab to the head that we just talked about. That includes the slices along Alex's right side of his neck, slices that were so deep that they cut through the external and the internal jugular vein, leading, as all of the medical doctors agreed who testified about it, said it was going to lead to a lot of bleeding. That includes the cut to Alex's groin that involved a lot of bleeding. I mean, you saw, not only did you hear from the doctors, you saw Alex's sweater, you saw his pants, you saw how much bleeding that is. So Alex is supposedly either in the car or right near the car when that happens. When that slice occurred and all that bleeding, again, it's not spurting blood, but it's heavy bleeding. What do the physical facts tell us about that story, that Alex is in the car when that happens? Well, this is the interior of the car. Now we see a fair amount of blood in here, but what we see is transferred blood that's smeared off of Alex when he sits there after he's stabbed. We do not see any pooling of blood here on the floor, where at that time, according to her story, there isn't going to be anything. We don't see any pooling of blood right outside of the car, and we'll see that in just a moment. No, we see a lot of smears of blood. We do not see that large volume of pooled blood that you're going to see if that slice across the neck occurred there. But what do we see outside? Outside we see pools of blood here. We see pools of blood here. See, it's not on this picture, but there's another pool of blood you saw up there. That tells you where Alex is when his neck is sliced, when his head is stabbed, when his groin is stabbed, where those pools of blood are. There aren't any pools of blood right there. Ladies and gentlemen, that tells you Alex was not stabbed in that car. Those physical facts, those are not facts that are dependent on somebody's memory. Those are not facts that are dependent or that could be not encoded because of stress. Those are not facts that have anything to do with whether somebody has PTSD or not. Those are physical facts, and they contradict the defendant's story. I also heard about the defendant's license. This is another physical fact. Remember? And I asked her, I said, all right, and this is a direct quote out of the transcript of the defendant's story that she told on the witness stand just a few days ago. All right, you told Officer O'Neill you couldn't find your driver's license, correct? Her answer was, I think I was having trouble shuffling around. The middle console was full of lots of paper and stuff. She couldn't find her license in there. Well, what do the physical facts tell us about this one? Physical facts show us this is her license here, all right? That's her license on the driver's seat. And what do the physical facts tell us about the center console? She can't find this license in here, in this spot there. That makes no sense. She didn't want to find her license. She didn't want to get her license out because she didn't want to open that center console because she knew this knife was in that center console. She knew this was there, and she didn't want the police to see that knife that were there, because that might raise some flags with them. That might raise some concerns that maybe everything isn't all right. That's why she doesn't get her license out. She doesn't want anybody to see that knife. And what do the physical facts about the defendant's injuries tell us? Physical facts about the injuries tell us exactly what Dr. Tillotson told you. And we're going to talk about why Dr. Tillotson is credible in a little while. The physical facts about her injuries tell you that those injuries were not inflicted by Alex in an attack on her. Even just looking at them and understanding them yourself, it's clear. I mean, this, ladies and gentlemen, comes right from the exhibit. I think it's exhibit 195. And you saw this was part of the page that was put up on the screen. And this is what the chapter talks about as parallel, superficial, incised wounds. They're not talking about geometrically parallel lines. They're talking about lines that are going in the same direction, all right, as opposed to, lines that are going all over the place. And you can just imagine if you're kicking and moving and your leg is going all over the place, it's going to be impossible to cut a straight line. Lines are going to be zigzag, they're going to be starting, stopping, they're going to be all over the place. But this is talking about multiple parallel, superficial, incised wounds. And what do we see on the defendant? Not only do we see that, but we start with this one right here, which the defendant admits she did to herself. And take a look at that in comparison to these on her hand. Very similar depth, very similar looking wounds. Compare them to these right here on her leg. Again, very similar looking, multiple lines. Again, when you consider what the picture in the textbook itself shows, multiple parallel superficial incised wounds. Multiple superficial incised wounds. And you look at these, again, multiple superficial, admittedly not parallel, but again, straight lines. Not something that makes sense with somebody who's moving and kicking and moving all over the place, which is the defendant's original story. And I'm not going to, for various reasons, show another one of the pictures which shows the even more superficial wounds in the most sensitive area. But she needs those there because she knows that Plan B has to include claiming that Alex was attempting to sexually assault her, so she's got to put some wounds there. She's got to put some wounds in that sensitive area. But what, ladies and gentlemen, you remember, she said her story to Detective Prock is, I cut my hand when I grabbed the knife. I grabbed it with my hand on the blade, and it hurt a lot. This is what Dr. Tillotson says it looks like when you grab the blade, and it hurts a lot to get it away from your assailant. And so the defendant's story has to change again. All right? She gets confronted with this when Dr. Tillotson testifies at a hearing before trial. She knows now that story about grabbing the knife by the blade to pull it away from Alex doesn't work anymore. So her story has to change. Her story changes to, I batted at the knife, and then I kneed him in the groin, and that's how I got the knife away from him. Her story changes when she's confronted by the facts. And her story on getting the knife then from there doesn't make much sense because according to her story, her glasses are off, she can't see more than a couple inches in front of her, and yet she's able to find the knife, pick it up, and use it without her glasses. Her story changes, her story makes no sense. She's not telling the truth. And the physical facts, her own injuries tell you that. And her own injuries tell you how likely is it that Alex could have cut her exactly the same depth, exactly the same way as she admittedly cut herself, when Alex is supposedly doing that through her clothing. Ask yourself, does that make any sense? When we talk about the defendant's clothes and what they tell us about her story, we start with the blood that's on her blue flannel shirt. I'm not going to take it out now, I'm going to take it out in a little bit. There's blood on her blue flannel shirt. And whose blood is on her blue flannel shirt? The defendant's blood. That's whose blood is on that shirt. And ladies and gentlemen, you heard the testimony, you saw the gold sweater. There's no visible blood on the gold sweater. How does the blood get from her skin onto the blue shirt without touching the gold sweater, without leaving a stain on the gold sweater too? We don't have magic blood that goes through that sweater from her skin to the blue shirt. Defendant's story is that she didn't take off any of her clothes, she didn't remove any of her shirts, she didn't take anything off, and she carved the word boy in her arm through her shirt. Now first off, how do you do that and be able to make a readable word on your body that you scratch into it with a knife through clothes without being able to see what you're doing? But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, Here's what she does and where she does it. And look at that in reference, this is the shirt that's closest to her. This is the shirt that is just above his gold sweater or gold yellow tiger shirt. But the one that's closest to her skin on her arm. How do you do this through this hole in that shirt? And if that shirt is pushed up or out of the way, why is this hole there? Hole is there because she creates the scene afterwards. She takes off the shirts, she carves boy in her arm, and then cuts them up to try to fit her story. She just doesn't do a very good job of it. I want to talk a little bit more about her clothes. The defendant's story is that Alex is cutting her through her clothes, cutting her legs. They're going to bleed. We heard that, you know that, and you heard that from the doctors. Those cuts are going to bleed. All right. So you'd expect right next to the cut, where the cut in her leg is, you're going to expect to find some blood. Makes sense. And you know what? We did find blood there. But what doesn't fit the defendant's story is the blood that we find right next to that big cut on her pants leg, right next to where that incision or that incised wound is in her leg, is not her blood. It's Alex's blood. Why is Alex's blood there? When Alex wasn't bleeding when this was supposedly happening. Why isn't it her blood? Her blood is found on this leg, where her hand would be, and her blood is found in a mixture farther away from the cuts in the leg. It's because she cuts those clothes afterwards. And she cuts those clothes after she's killed Alex and Alex's blood has gotten on her. And she cuts them when they're not on her. And then cuts her leg so she can create the scene. She also tells Detective Prock, when he's asking her where she's injured, she makes sure that she says, oh yeah, there's a cut on the pants here. I was injured over here on my left leg too. But there isn't one. Because she's trying to match up all the places that you remember she cut her jeans. She just doesn't have a cut there. And still more on the clothes. And here I want to show you the clothes and show you this. Because we got to take a look. And it's a muddy area where we're at. And what do the clothes show us? Start with this yellow t-shirt, Alex Mengels t-shirt. It shows us mud right here. There's mud on this yellow t-shirt. It shows us there's mud right here on this blue, what was described as spotted, but what she said was a plant shirt. And it shows us there's mud on this blue flannel shirt. But what it doesn't show us, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't show us any mud at all on the gold sweater. None. Ladies and gentlemen, considering that physical fact, the fact that there is no mud on that sweater, and yet there's mud all the way down to the yellow tiger shirt, that tells us that her story that she never took any of those clothes off is not true. Because how does the mud get through the flannel shirt, get through the gold sweater, get through the blue plant or spotted shirt, to the yellow shirt? Why does it happen if those shirts don't come off? If she doesn't take off any of her clothes? It gets on there because she has to take them off to carve boy in her arm. It has to get on there because she takes them off so that she can set up that scene. That's why there's no mud on the gold sweater, but there is mud on the blue shirt and the tiger shirt. We need to also talk about Alex's clothes and what they tell us. You saw when Dr. Mills testified how with his clothes, with his sweater, his pants, his underwear, that those all match up. The holes in those clothes all match up perfectly with all of the injuries that Alex suffered. And you saw, and I'm going to show you again, Alex's coat. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Keep the gloves on for a little while because I need to talk about that a couple of times. But Alex's coat, remember, he's got 2 stab wounds in the back. He's got 3 stab wounds in the side. And what do we see with Alex's coat? You see, yep. We've got, I'll do it from the inside, I think it's a little easier to see on the inside. We've got 2 cuts in Alex's coat. We've got one right here, the shoulder area, and we've got one right here, the lower back. That's where we have 2 cuts in Alex's coat. What do we know about cuts to Alex? Where do we know about where he was stabbed? Well, first off, I apologize, not the greatest picture in the world, but this is Alex on Officer Zwiefelhofer's squad video. You can see how the coat covers his side. Goes down, covers his side. It's important because what we know is that Alex has these 2 injuries labeled. And again, the labeling, the numbering, it's just arbitrary. We're not trying to say this was the 15th and that was the 16th injury he suffered. It's just how Dr. Mills marks them. We've got this cut here, and this stab wound here, and this stab wound here. They correspond to the 2 holes I showed you just a moment ago in the coat. But we also have these 3 stab wounds. Sharp force injury number 8, sharp force injury number 9, and sharp force injury number 10. And according to the defendant's story, Alex has his coat on the whole time she's stabbing him. The left side of Alex's coat, you can look all you want, you can take all the time you want to look at it. There is not a single hole in Alex's coat on the left side. Not one. Look at it all you want, as much time as you want. You're never going to find a hole on that side. So ask yourself, ladies and gentlemen, if Alex is wearing his coat, if the defendant's story is he is, how did these 3 stab wounds magically appear in him? They go through his sweater just like they should. But those 3 injuries took place after Alex had taken his coat off. And the defendant's story is that doesn't happen until after she had stabbed him every time she's going to. Her story doesn't fit the physical facts. Her story is a lie. Just one more lie. So what does the DNA tell us about what happened on March 22nd? DNA doesn't lie. DNA doesn't have problems with memory. DNA doesn't have issues. DNA tells us facts. And it tells us where Alex's blood is, and it tells us where the defendant's blood is. But maybe more importantly, in many respects, it tells us where the defendant's blood is not, where her DNA is not. Because where her DNA is not also tells us that the defendant's story is a lie. So let's start with the inside of the car. This is a photo that shows, and we've added on to it so that you've got an idea of where things are. What the DNA tells us about whose blood is in the car. Remember, the defendant's story is that she is being cut while she sits in the car. She's or not sits, but lays down on the back seat of the car. That the cuts to her leg happen while she's laying down in the back seat of the car. That the cuts to her left hand happen while she's laying down in the back seat of the car. Those are going to bleed. We know that. We've heard that. Common sense tells us that. Whose blood is in the back seat of the car? Alex's. And only Alex's. If the defendant is being cut while she's in the back seat of the car, why is none of her blood, why is not any of her blood found in there? They sampled a lot of locations in there, on the seat backs, all over. None of it's hers. It's all Alex's. If she was being cut there, why isn't her blood there? What does the blood and the DNA evidence tell us about the outside of the car? It tells us, and we've talked about this, I'm not going to repeat it, that the pools of blood are Alex's. But equally importantly, ladies and gentlemen, it tells us, and it's not shown specifically on here, but this trailer, defendant's blood is on 2 locations, 6 feet apart. You heard that testimony. two different spots, 6 feet apart on that trailer, her blood's there. Her story does not explain why her blood's on that trailer. On that trailer because she's trying to set up a scene. Her blood is also, and while you can't see it in this picture, her blood is on the outside of this driver's side rear door. Big drop of her blood is there. It runs down the door. In her story, that door is never closed. How does her blood get on the other side of that door, a drop of it like that, under her story? It doesn't fit her story. It's not explained by her story. It's explained by setting up a scene later on when the door is closed and before she tries to pull Alex out of the car and leaves him in this position. She's cutting herself, she's making up the scene, and that's how her blood gets on the outside. And her blood on the trunk, we already talked about, that's a spot. She had to change her story to fit the facts. And ladies and gentlemen, maybe most importantly, what does the DNA on the knife tell us about whether this knife was used to cut the defendant, as she claims? What the blood evidence and the DNA evidence on this knife tells us is that, yes, there's blood. In fact, Kevin Scott didn't just do a presumptive test, he did a confirmatory test to confirm that there's blood on the blade, there's blood on the handle of this knife. And what does it tell us about whose blood is on the blade of this knife? Who was cut with this knife? Alex Woodward. The DNA evidence does not say that there's any of the defendant's DNA, any of her blood on the blade of this knife. If Alex was cutting her with this knife, where is her blood? Her DNA is on the handle as part of a mixture with Alex, where Alex is the major contributor and she's the minor. And that, ladies and gentlemen, makes sense that she's using this knife to stab Alex repeatedly, which we know is the truth. No blood of the defendant, no DNA of the defendant on the blade of that knife. And what, ladies and gentlemen, do these wounds, these deep wounds to Alex's neck that severed the jugular vein, tell us about the defendant's story? They tell us, ladies and gentlemen, that again, she changed her story to fit the facts, to try and fit the facts. It doesn't work very well, but she tried to. Because her story to Ryan Prock on March 24th is that Alex is on top of her when she slices his neck 3 times. Alex is on top of her. And if that's the case, ladies and gentlemen, when that wound starts bleeding like crazy, like it's going to, that blood is going to fall down right on top of the defendant, onto her shirt. She's got to change her story after the fact because Alex's blood isn't on her shirt. It didn't come down when she sliced across his neck like it would have. So she has to change her story and say, no, he's not on top of me, he's in front of me. Changing her story to try and fit the facts. Because the facts from the DNA do not support her story. She's also got serious inconsistencies. And again, the state totally agrees with Dr. Hopper that, when someone is involved in a stressful situation, a seriously stressful situation, that, we agree, the science is clear, that, they will concentrate on central facts. Absolutely agree that if somebody's sticking a gun in your face, you're most likely to concentrate on that gun that's in your face. Absolutely, we totally acknowledge that. But the inconsistencies I want to talk about are inconsistencies either in central facts that would be super encoded, that she would remember without any question, or for information that happens before that stress started. Remember that line that goes up, the stressful event is what starts that process of memory issues. The inconsistencies are relating to what happens before that, when your memory is normal. She told you, her story today is Alex was going to have her one more time. He was going to sexually assault her. But when Ryan Prock asked her about that situation, asked her what was going to happen, she said, well, I just think he was going to look at me. That's probably the first thing that came to her mind when she's talking about it then, but later on thinking about it, thinking, geez, that doesn't sound really good. I killed him. Doesn't sound great that he was just trying to look at me and I just got these superficial cuts. It'll sound better if I say he was trying to rape me. That sounds a whole lot better. That sounds a whole lot better to protect myself from getting convicted of first-degree intentional homicide. Ryan Prock asked her, why would somebody be cutting your clothes? And she told him, I don't know. Again, a central fact is what's going on here. And later on she remembers and she says, oh yeah, that's right. He cut my clothes once before. That's not something that was part of the stressful event. That's something that happened a long time ago. Supposedly, at least, happened a long time ago. And she doesn't tell Ryan Prock about that. She says, I have no idea. And while I guess probably not an inconsistency where she says one thing one time and she says another, but it's interesting when you listen to her statement to Ryan Prock about the events of March 22nd. When she's talking to Ryan Prock on March 24th, she says, when I got to that road. That's what she said. Well, that's interesting language because just think about it again, using your common sense. When you're driving somewhere, that's how you're going to describe it. But if you're a passenger, it's going to be more like, well, when we got there, or when when they got there, or something like that. Not when I got there. Sorry about this. Some more inconsistencies. Again, central facts. Actually, the first one is a fact before the stress started. All right, remember her testimony, her story is, I'm in the car trying to find something to get us unstuck. All right, both times when she talked to Ryan Prock in March, and when she got on the stand and told her story was she was trying to find something. But when Ryan asked her, did you throw anything out? She said, nope, didn't throw a thing out, didn't throw anything out. Her story changed now to, I threw out the blanket, I threw out the pillow while I was hunting through there. From before the stressful event started, assuming you believe it was that stressful event, before that happens, when things are just being normally encoded, or memories are normally being encoded. Her description of Alex taking off the glasses, she never tells Ryan Prock that. And yet her story changes to that because it has to look better. It has to look like she can't see anything so that her story can be better for her. And her story changes on where the first cuts were. Her story changes on that because remember, she told Ryan Prock, he first starts cutting on my legs. But she changes it, and she has to change it to fit the facts. Because she's got to change it to fit the facts that her first concern was when he's cutting her sweater and then she feels that prick in her stomach. And now she's on alert. That's when the stress starts. She's got to change it to that. To change in her story. Ladies and gentlemen, when you've considered all of those things I talked about, the defendant's credibility is zero. Her story is just that, a story. It's not the truth. It's not what happened. I want to spend a couple minutes, and I don't want to spend more than that because, frankly, Alex's journals are a distraction in this case. They're a distraction from what really happened, the defendant murdering Alex. But we do need to talk about them briefly. And I think the first thing you need to think about them is the unreality of the defendant's story about how she first met Alex and first got to know about these journals. Her story is, she goes into a bar and she sees Alex sitting there, he's writing some stuff up, and she asks him what she's writing about. Oh, that makes some sense. But what does her story then become? He says, yeah, I'm writing about philosophy and I'm writing about cannibalism. Ladies and gentlemen, think to yourself. And think about that situation. Use your common sense. Your common sense, what does it tell you? Does it tell you, A, that someone who just meets someone else is going to tell them I'm writing about cannibalism? And B, does your common sense tell you that someone who just hears that in a bar at night, what's their first reaction going to be to that? Is their first reaction going to be, oh, tell me everything you can about that area? Or is your first reaction going to be, oh, nice seeing ya, bye? That's your first reaction. You don't want to know everything you can about cannibalism from someone you've just met in a bar. But secondly, look at the defendant's description. She describes Alex's philosophy and says, and certainly Alex definitely has an interest in St. Augustine's famous quotation, love and do as you will. There's no doubt about it. He has many writings about that. All of them philosophical, but he has many writings about it. And the defendant's story is that Alex told her that basically means I can do whatever the heck I want, whenever I want, I can take whatever I want, it's all about me. And taking whatever I want. Now, there was only two people to that conversation where this supposedly happened. The defendant and Alex.
Attorney, I'm sorry.
Alex?
I think adjourn needs a break.
Oh, okay. All right, that's fine.
Sorry.
All right. And if that happens again, if somebody needs a break, that's fine. I know I can, my wife tells me I talk too long a lot, so. There's only two people to that conversation, defendant and Alex. And Alex can't be here in person to tell you that the defendant is lying about that. But you know what? Alex is still here to tell you the defendant is lying. Because Alex tells you it in the journal entry titled Desire and Will. One of the entries that's in Exhibit 697, the journal documents, but the one one of the ones that the defendant didn't bother to bring up herself. Didn't bother to bring it up because it doesn't support her story. It doesn't support her story on what her discussions with Alex was about. Because that journal entry, and in that entry, Alex is here today telling you what he means. Telling you the defendant's a liar.
Objection.
Telling you,
Objections noted, overruled.
telling you she's lying to you when her story is that Alex believed in taking. Because desire and will tells you what love and do as you will really means. Love and do as you will means it is an expression of an excellent morality. It is about giving, to give and give and give to the other. It is in fact, and Alex is telling you in that journal entry, it is in fact the exact opposite of the defendant's story. That Alex is about giving. He is not about taking. And finally, the defendant's story on this issue, when you listen to her and heard her on direct and cross-examination, just doesn't ring true. She's on the stand, she's on direct, reads a part of a thing and says, oh yeah, I remember absolutely clearly 100%. Alex and I, we talked directly about that. We talked about it and he said this and he said that, said this and he said that. But when I tried to cross-examine her on some of the entries that she didn't talk about on direct, well, you know, no, I don't really remember that stuff. I don't remember anything about that. After months of time, she's able to, again, craft her story to fit her narrative. Just doesn't ring true. And I want to talk about the book Fear and Trembling. And frankly, ladies and gentlemen, this part is somewhat, I think, insulting to your intelligence, the use of this by the defense. Because the defense brought this book out how many times to show you the cover of this book? To show you a cover of a book that's about the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. And I'm sure many of you may very well be familiar with the story of Abraham taking Isaac out into the desert at the angel's command to sacrifice Isaac because that's what God wanted. And Soren Kierkegaard in this book writes a book about that and the philosophical constructs of that and how that has to do with faith. But they trotted that book out all those times not to talk about the contents of that book because you didn't hear about a single word inside of that book during the testimony. All you saw was the cover because they want to insult your intelligence and think you're going to think because you see a book with a cover that Alex has that has a cover on it that has somebody with a knife at somebody else's throat, that Alex is somehow the one who is attacking the defendant here. The defendant is trying to insult your intelligence. Don't let that happen. And the other thing about that book is the defendant's testimony is, oh, Alex would read that all the time to me while we're having sex, while we're engaged in sexual activity. He'd sit there and he'd read it to me while he's having sex with me. Or remember her testimony as well? Her story is they always had sex in the dark or with a dim candlelight. How is he reading a book to her while he's having sex with her in the dark? I don't think Alex had X-ray vision. He doesn't have the night vision capabilities of the latest iPhones, ladies and gentlemen. And ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at what the defendant's story says about what had to happen after she stabbed Alex 16 times. Let's think about it. Her story is essentially this. I stabbed Alex 15 times while I'm in the car. Alex then walked away, went over by the trailer, stood around there for a while, said, I need your help urinating. So she gets up out of the car, walks over by the trailer. He grabs her again, and she stabs him another time in the left side. She said her story is she stabbed him again. He then lets go. She trots away to somewhere else. Alex then walks a little bit, takes off his coat that doesn't, by the way, have any stab wounds in the side, even though he does, and takes his coat off, lays down on his coat, well, he's still, got blood running out of his neck, coat that doesn't have big pools of blood on it from that, or the wound to his groin, as he lays on it. She then sometime collects her glasses, goes to the back of the car, her boy in his arm while Alex is just laying there on his coat. Not getting any blood on it. Blood somehow is getting onto the ground, but not onto his coat. She then goes back to the car, the inside of the car. Again, she's bleeding. Where does the blood go? Doesn't go in the car, but she goes in there, somehow rummages around, finds Alex's phone, takes off her other boot, and trots off away. And Alex then, after that, after she leaves, because he hasn't moved yet, Alex all of a sudden decides, oh, well, let's see, I think I better get up from the ground here, pick up my coat, trot back over to the car, get all the way into the passenger side of the car, because that's where his feet are when he's found, and take off his shoes, put those down on the floor, and then take his coat, neatly lay it on top of his shoes, and then proceed to die and fall until he's out of the car. That's what you have to believe happens. And let's take a look at Alex's position that he's in when he's found. Remember, he's sitting over here. He's sitting right here because there, you see where his feet are. Feet are down on the passenger side floor well. He's sitting there, and you can see the blood transfer on the seat where he's sitting. How does Alex fall into this position? Fall so that his right arm is wedged into the door, his left arm is somewhere there in the footwell, and his sweater is pulled up on his back. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what this shows you is that somebody tried to pull Alex out of that car. That's how the blood gets here. That's from his neck wound. And transfers there as they're pulling him across, and he ends up getting wedged so that the defendant can't pull him out. That's what that shows you. And that's what that tells you. He isn't going to fall in a position like that. That makes no sense. But you have to believe that that happened for the defendant's story to be true. And ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the defendant's story after she stabbed Alex 15 times, waiting for that 16th one to happen. What's her story? She's in the car. She's in the car. Alex is over by the trailer, and he says, I've gotta pee, come help me. Now remember, she's in that stage where Dr. Hopper told you, assuming she's telling you the truth, that her amygdala is in control, right? All right, her amygdala is in control, telling her, not consciously but subconsciously, to do what instinct tells you. The instincts that we developed when we had to worry about large predators coming and eating us. The amygdala is telling her what to do there. She's not consciously thinking what to do. She's not consciously thinking, should I help him, should I not help him? Her amygdala is controlling her. And let's think about it in terms of Dr. Hopper's analogy of a lion comes walking through that door right there, and your amygdala takes over and tells you what to do. Is your instincts developed from when that lion might have been out there regularly eating you? Does it tell you to go up and give the lion a hug? No. It tells you to stay as far away from that lion as you can. Your amygdala tells you to freeze maybe. Your amygdala tells you maybe to run. Your amygdala tells you get safe. And at that point in time, when she supposedly has been attacked by Alex and is fearful of Alex, she's in the car, her amygdala is going to tell her, close the doors, lock the doors, you're safe. Her amygdala is not telling her to go up and help him pee. And what about as she's leaving? Now her story is she lost one boot during the struggle in the car, and she takes off the other boot after Alex is laid down. What's your amygdala going to tell you as it decides that you've got to flee the scene to be safe? It's going to tell you to get out of there as quickly as you can. So it's not going to tell you to take time to take off a boot so that you're moving with just in your stocking feet on a 40-degree day. Your amygdala is going to tell you, get out of there, don't worry about the boots, or the other option is put on the other boots so you can get out of there as quickly as you can. But it's not going to tell you to take time to take off a boot at that point. What about the defendant's actions at Don Sippel's house? I think these are important. And they're important because when you're scared, you want help. You want the police to come to protect you, to take care of you. But what is the defendant's actions? He gets to Don Sippel's house. He doesn't ask Don to call the police. He asks if Don can take him to the hospital. She doesn't want the police there. She doesn't want the police finding her there and possibly finding Alex's body because she hasn't had the time to clean up yet. And she can't remember anything, but she can remember Jason Mengel, and she can remember it enough to be able to, in fact, spell Jason's last name for the police. I want to talk a little bit about motive. Now, the judge has told you we don't have to prove that the defendant had a motive. Motive is not the same as intent. But that motive is something that you can consider. And if the defendant had a motive, it's something you can consider in determining whether or not she's guilty or not. And the defendant had a motive that day. And her motive goes back a couple days earlier to March 19th. March 19th, remember, is the day that Jason Mengel met Jenna Van de Zandt in a bar. And Jenna talked to Jason about the situation between the defendant and Alex. And talked about the relationship they had. And told Jason, in fact, about the defendant's actions at Alex's apartment where she was in the shower, she came out with just a towel on and told Matt Schreiner I just broke up with Jason. Isn't that great? A big smile on her face. And Jason, when he gets home from the bar, calls the defendant and talks to her and confronts her about these things. Now, before that, they were trying to see about getting back together. They were still having loving conversations. You know, they still were meeting occasionally and staying in a hotel with each other and making love. They were still having loving conversations, talking about how each of them want to have children, but they only want to have potentially children with each other. They're still telling each other they love each other. But Jason calls her, confronts her with this, and hangs up on her. Defendant, what does she do? She immediately calls Jenna and says, Jenna, you've got to fix this. You've got to take care of this. You've got to fix the problem you made. Jenna writes a note, leaves it for Jason that he gets on the 20th. And in the note, basically, she says, oh, there may have been some miscommunications, but I'm out of this. I'm washing my hands of this. Jason shares this letter, this note, with the defendant. When she shares it with the defendant, it's clear Jenna didn't do what the defendant told her to do. Jenna didn't fix it. And you can certainly understand why the hairs on Jenna's neck had gone up when she had that conversation with the defendant. Because now the defendant knows Jenna didn't fix this problem with Alex. She needs to fix it. And so she wakes up on March 22nd and comes to Eau Claire with fire in her eyes, as Jason described it. And she comes to get Alex to...
Objection.
Note your objection, preserved for the record, overruled, may continue.
And when Jenna didn't fix it, she is going to fix it. She's going to go to Alex's apartment, and she's going to go there, and she's going to get Alex to admit their relationship was wrong. It was a mistake. You heard that in her own words in the interview on March 24th. She said, I went there, we talked about our relationship, I told him how our relationship was a mistake, it was wrong, and I asked him if he felt the same way, and he said no, he didn't. But she's got to fix it because that's what's standing between her and the love of her life. Because remember that last Instagram exchange between Jason Mengel and the defendant the night of March 21st. An Instagram that's polite, but certainly not loving. An Instagram where the defendant tells Jason, based on her conversation with her father, my life starts now. And Jason doesn't respond to that with, our life starts together. He responds with 2 messages. 1, that's a good idea. 2, no more lies. And then the Instagram exchange ends with the defendant expressing her feelings are still there. She still loves Jason. She still wants to be with Jason by closing out that Instagram exchange with my husband. And Jason doesn't respond, my wife, he just responds, dream wildly. So the defendant's got to fix this problem herself. And the only thing standing in the way is that relationship she had with Alex. She needs him to say, it was a mistake. She needs to get Alex out of the picture. And Alex says no. So she's got to get him to a place where she can make him say it was a mistake. A place in private. Louis Bjork's field. And when Alex continues to say, no, I'm not going to do that, she snaps, she gets into a rage, and she stabs him. She stabs him in the head. She slices his neck.
It's total speculation. Objection, this is total and complete speculation. You're not allowed to speculate.
This is an argument, and I'm going to note your objection. It's overruled.
That's what she does. When you look at the defendant's testimony, when she's talking about something that other people are present for, that other people can confirm or deny, she can't remember things. Don't remember that. Don't remember that, you know. Asked her about the interview with Officer Reeves. I don't remember anything about that. Ask her about talking to the nurses. I don't remember anything about that. Ask her about anything that somebody else can confirm or deny it. She can't remember it. You ask her about things that only happened between herself and Alex, all of a sudden her memory comes to light. And she remembers everything. That's not the truth. That's a story. Let's talk briefly about the experts. We've got Dr. Mills, Dr. Tillotson, Dr. Tovar, Dr. Benson, Dr. Thomas, and Dr. Hopper. Let's start with the medical experts. First thing that's important is both forensic pathologists who talked to you told you Alex died from sharp force injuries that the defendant inflicted on him. They confirmed the defendant caused Alex's death. And then you heard from a couple of experts, a couple of doctors on the defendant's injuries. And you heard from Dr. Tillotson. Dr. Tillotson, the only doctor who testified here who wasn't being paid to come here and testify, whose only interest, he told you what his interest is. His interest is in his patient and what's best for his patient. All he's trying to do every single day, and all he was trying to do in this case was help his patient, who was the defendant. And he told you and he explained why, and we've gone through why. His opinion is these injuries are self-inflicted that the defendant had. And if they're self-inflicted, ladies and gentlemen, if all of them are, the defendant's lying, obviously, that she's guilty. You also heard from Dr. Tovar. Dr. Tovar on that, who says, well, my opinion is they're consistent with being inflicted by somebody else. And that's what he writes in his report. And my opinion is that Alex's injuries are consistent with somebody acting in self-defense. And that's what he writes in his report. And the defendant told law enforcement the boy was carved into her arm by Alex. And that's what he writes in his report. A report that he can't even get Alex's last name right, except about half the time. I mean, puts it in there, I think it was 17 times, he gets it right 9 times, he gets it wrong 8 times. That's the type of expertise that you want to rely upon. But not only that, he writes his report in such a way that it sounds like he's supporting everything the defendant says. But when you actually ask him questions, well, yeah, no, it could be consistent with something else. It could be consistent with self-inflicted injuries. No, it could be, consistent with somebody killing somebody unprovoked. Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, yeah, you're right. She told law enforcement that she did it herself. but he doesn't put any of that in. And especially galling is the fact that he puts in there that she says that Alex carved boy into her arm when he knew without any question that Alex didn't do that. And yet he writes it in his report. What credibility does someone who does that kind of stuff have with you? I submit none. Dr. Benson testifies it's his opinion that she is diagnosed with PTSD, but he cannot tell you the exact cause of that PTSD. He can't tell you what it was from. And Dr. Benson, who gratuitously adds the statement, "I'm not a hired gun," when nobody had asked him if he was or wasn't a hired gun, he just ports it out, actually acted a heck of a lot like a hired gun when, on cross-examination, the state was asking him, "Does PTSD cause you to lie?" And he says, "Well, that's a difficult question. You got to consider whether it's a lie of omission or a lie of commission." Making it clear, commission, if you know you're lying at the time you're lying, that's not explained by PTSD. When you try to get him pinned down, he just keeps changing and changing and changing the question so that he doesn't have to actually answer that question. That sounds like someone who has an axe to grind in the case, someone who has an agenda in the case, not someone who's just here, like Dr. Tillotson, testifying about what's best for his patient. And then we have Dr. Hopper, and frankly, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Hopper is an expert. His science is very, very well accepted as to what happened. But Dr. Hopper was also not a hired gun. Dr. Hopper was telling you things, and he was being straight with you, and he was being straight with the defense, and he was being straight with the state. He doesn't know what the stress is that started that whole process, assuming it even started, of causing this super encoding of central facts and not encoding of peripheral facts. He doesn't know what that stress is. Although he did say that that stress could be someone being involved in a murder. That was his testimony. But he doesn't know what it is. And he was honest about that. And he also told you that while certainly her statements and how she presented could be consistent with someone who had undergone a stressful event, he also said it could be consistent with someone who was just lying. And again, we can't know the cause of that stress. So, let's take a look at the timeline. This timeline is important. The timeline of events is important because this timeline tells us that right about 1:25 is when the defendant arrives at the scene where she ultimately kills Alex Woodward. And she arrives at Don Sippel's house about 4:15. The time of the 911 call. So we've got 2 hours and 50 minutes between that. 2 hours and 50 minutes between the time she gets there to Don Sippel's and the time she's arrived at the scene. Her description of what happened, her description of getting stuck once, getting it unstuck, getting it stuck a second time, looking in the back seat for something to get unstuck, then sitting on the trailer for a little while, and then going back to the car and the attack that her story talks about. An hour, maybe, at the most, to the time when she's heading to Don Sippel's house. 10 minutes to get there. That leaves her an hour and a half or more yet that's unaccounted for. An hour and a half in here that's totally unaccounted for by her story. And you know why? Because that's the time it takes her to set up the scene. That's the time it takes her to set up the scene after murdering Alex to make it look like it was self-defense. That's the time it takes her to try and get Alex's body out of the car. That's the time it takes her to try and put her blood in locations where she can do that. That's the time it takes her to cut herself. It's the time it takes her to take off her clothes, cut them, and then put them back on after she cuts herself. It's the time it takes her for the blood on her cuts to dry and then get to Don Simmons' house. It's the time it takes her to create a scene. So what do the physical facts, what do the evidence as it relates to the blood, what is the physical facts as it relates to where the blood is and what type of blood there is in various locations tell us about what happened? So ladies and gentlemen, those physical facts, that blood tells us that Alex Woodworth is outside of the car when he's stabbed. Those physical facts tell us, as we talked about, that the defendant is behind Alex Woodworth when she stabs him in the head. And then Alex is out somewhere in this area or here where those pools of blood are when the defendant slices Alex's neck. And then Alex retreats to the car to try and get away. He runs to the car, trying to get away, and as he's doing that, he's getting stabbed in the back because those stabs are through the coat. And he must take off the coat at some point in time to try and get it off. Maybe as he's getting stabbed, he's trying to take it off. And he gets in the car, and he's stabbed in the side 3 times while he sits in the car. So again, those stab wounds are peri-mortem, as Dr. Mills told you, close to the time of death. And we have cuts in the seat of the car that tell us that there's stabbing taking place in there. That's what the physical evidence tells us. And the defendant then tried to get Alex out of the car, as you can see here, and couldn't do it. That's what the physical evidence tells us. The physical evidence tells us the defendant did this intentionally, that she did this not in self-defense, and that the defendant is guilty. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you consider all of the evidence in this case, when you consider all of the evidence in this case, it is clear. It is clear beyond a reasonable doubt. It is clear beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant sitting there is guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. It's time to tell the defendant, no more lies. You're not going to get away with just one more lie. Make her take responsibility for Alex's death on March 22nd. Find her guilty. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a recess. I'm not exactly sure how long at this point in time. I don't know if we're going to have a snack or lunch, but we're going to have a break before the defense closing arguments. So we'll let you know in a few minutes. Okay, so we're going to excuse the jury. All rise.